In this video, we will be covering aggregate supply, including short-run aggregate supply and long-run aggregate supply. Within short-run aggregate supply, we will break it down into the Keynesian, intermediate, and classical portions of the short-run aggregate supply curve. The definition of aggregate supply, also known as total output, is the total supply of goods and services produced within an economy at a given overall price level in a given time period. It is represented by a curve that usually has a positive relationship between the x and y axis, which are our GDP and price level respectively. This is different from aggregate demand, which usually has a negative relationship between its two axes. Earlier in the macroeconomics course, you would have learned about supply and demand, but from a different perspective. This perspective is microeconomics, meaning it is being evaluated for a single market for a good or service, rather than the market for an entire economy's supply and demand. As shown on the left, this is represented by the microeconomic supply and demand, which has the x-axis as quantity and the y-axis as price level, rather than our GDP and price level, which is for aggregate supply and demand. Look at this graph. The first portion of short-run aggregate supply that we will look at is the Keynesian or immediate portion. This horizontal aggregate supply curve assumes that there are unused resources in an economy that can be put into use without impacting the price level. This simple Keynesian case has a perfectly horizontal aggregate supply curve. Firms will increase levels of output without the price increased to stimulate production. Economists feel that this horizontal aggregate supply curve is relevant only at low levels of output compared to the full employment output level. The next portion we will be covering is the intermediate portion of short-run aggregate supply. As an economy moves closer to full employment, businesses require a price increase in order to find it profitable to increase output and hire more employees. Thus, higher price levels are needed to increase the aggregate output level. On the short-run aggregate supply graph, this is represented by an upwards curve that becomes more vertical as it gets closer to full employment. With a fixed nominal wage, a higher price level leads to a reduction in the real wage. With a reduction in the real wage, firms find it attractive to hire more labor and produce more output. The vertical portion of short-run aggregate supply is the classical portion, which represents the economy at full employment. If the aggregate demand curve were to shift outwards, in the classical region, the output of the economy would not be affected and only the price level would increase. The economy does not need to hire more people and is working efficiently. This graph represented currently shows classical, Keynesian, and intermediate regions of the short-run aggregate supply curve combined into one graph, which is how it is usually represented, depending on where you see it. What shifts short-run aggregate supply? Short-run aggregate supply curves shift when the cost of key inputs, such as resources, coal, oils, minerals, change, when inflationary expectations change, when technology used in manufacturing or the use in a business changes, or when business taxes and regulations controlled by the government change. Now we will look at the effects on our GDP and price level of the shifting outwards or inwards of short-run aggregate supply. When short-run aggregate supply curves shift to the right or outwards, price level is lower at every output and output is higher at every level. When short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left or inwards, price level is higher at every output level. This is shown by short-run aggregate supply 1 being the outward shift and short-run aggregate supply 2 being the inward shift. If the price level increases or decreases then there would be movement along the supply curve instead of a shift inwards or outwards. The long-run aggregate supply curve represents potential output at full employment. Because of this, all output will be sold and the natural rate of unemployment will stay around 5%. The economy will be at its long-run maximum sustainable level of output, often called potential output. The long-run aggregate supply curve, LRAS for short, is shown as a vertical line, which means that the output level is not affected by changes in demand or price level. What shifts long-run aggregate supply? Long-run aggregate supply shifts outwards or inwards when there's a change in quantity, quality, or technology. An example of an increase in quantity would be if a more abundant supply of a resource was discovered, which allows the manufacturer to produce more goods. An increase in quality of production would mean that there are better functioning products that are produced more efficiently. Improved technology, such as new machines or programs, allows the manufacturer to make more goods or produce them faster. Long-run aggregate supply represents the same idea of potential economic output as the Production Possibilities Frontier Curve, also known as the PPF, in the business cycle's trend line. If growth expands past the level of potential output, the economy functions at an unsustainable level with extremely low unemployment. Over time, the economy will move back to equilibrium if it is at an unsustainable level. Economic growth can be shown as a rightward shift of the long-run aggregate supply curve, showing a higher maximum sustainable output level. Such a shift is called a positive supply shock, and there will be a lower aggregate price level associated with each level of real GDP.
Thanks for watching! Video made by
Claren Moyers
and Nellie Johnson. Please like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed this video. We'll probably never post again. Thanks!